She said I could be her dad, and then she died the next morning. That was the moment David Whitmore, one of Boston's most powerful real estate tycoons, stopped being a man of numbers and became a man changed by love. He hadn't planned on rescuing anyone that night. He hadn't planned on leaving $1 million dinner to chase a girl in the cold. But when he looked into Emma's eyes, he saw something he'd forgotten. Existed a kind of silent dignity, the haunting kind that comes from surviving too much too young. And when her dying mother asked him to become Emma's father, David said yes without a second thought. What followed wasn't a miracle. It was messy, raw, human. A man who had everything was forced to confront how empty his life really was. A child who had lost everything dared to trust again. Together they would build something the world could never put a price on a family. But what happened next, what Emma said on the night of her 10th birthday, changed everything again. If you stay with us, you'll hear the moment that turned grief into purpose, and a little girl's dream into a legacy that would feed the city. And maybe, just maybe, it will feed something in you too. It was a bitter November night in Boston, and the glow of the Whitestone Grill lit up the rain-slicked sidewalks of the Back Bay district like a golden dream. Inside, beneath chandeliers that cost more than some people's homes, the air buzzed softly with the clink of wine glasses and whispered negotiations worth millions. At table 7, his usual sat David Whitmore, age 42, draped in an Armani suit and polished calm. The kind of man who measured time by deal closures, not sunsets. The kind of man who hadn't felt anything real in years. He was flanked by the mayor and 2 Swiss investors discussing a $500 million redevelopment project in the heart of Boston. Profits, metrics, percentages. David calculated them like a machine, his mind moving faster than the wine pouring into his glass. Until someone interrupted the precision. Lauren Mitchell, the senior waitress at Whitestone, and a woman who knew the preferences of the elite like the back of her hand, bent slightly toward David's shoulder and whispered just 4 words. That girl is hungry. He didn't even look up at first. He hated disruptions. But Lauren's voice had trembled just slightly, enough for the words to reach past the polished surface of his indifference. David finally turned irritated, following Lauren's gaze toward the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the street. There, pressed against the glass, was a girl, no more than 8. Her brown dress was thin, frayed, and soaked through at the hem. Her cheeks were windburnt, her shoes 2 sizes too large. But it was her eyes, huge, dark, unblinking, that stopped him cold. They weren't angry. They weren't even desperate. They were still, quiet, dignified in a way that haunted him. He blinked, feeling something inside him shift. A pressure, a memory he couldn't place. The mayor kept talking, oblivious. The numbers blurred. Then suddenly, David stood up. The napkin dropped. A $600 bottle of wine spilled across the tablecloth. His companions froze, confused. Without a word, David walked away from his steak, from the mayor, from the $500 million deal, from everything he usually never left unfinished. The restaurant held its breath as he crossed the dining room and disappeared through the revolving glass doors into the cold Boston night. Outside, the wind slapped him like truth. The girl Emma took a cautious step back, instinctively guarded like all children who've known the street too long. He knelt slightly, lowering himself to her height. "What's your name?" he asked softly, not knowing why his voice had gone hoarse. A long pause. "Then Emma," she whispered, eyes never leaving his. "Are you hungry?" Emma glanced down, then nodded barely. David reached out a hand. She didn't take it. "My mom said not to go with strangers," she said almost apologetically. He exhaled, impressed by her clarity, even in hunger. "That's very smart," he said. "How about we go somewhere safe? There's a coffee shop just around the corner. Lots of people. Bright lights, warm food." She hesitated, measured him, then nodded slowly. Inside the cafe, warm with the scent of cocoa and cinnamon, David ordered everything he could imagine a child might want: grilled cheese, hot chocolate, cookies, warm muffins. He sat across from Emma as she took slow, careful bites, like someone trying to make the moment last. Then she did something that shattered him. She wrapped half her croissant in a napkin and got up. She walked to the corner of the cafe where an older homeless man sat alone and handed it to him with both hands. He smiled, she smiled back. David watched, speechless. She had nothing, and yet she gave. That moment pierced him deeper than any business loss he'd ever known. As she sat back down, a woman in a fur coat across the cafe sneered at David, and muttered loudly, "How noble of Mr. Whitmore." Slumming it with street kids now, David didn't blink. Instead, he turned and said clearly, "This child has more dignity than most people I've met in my life, including you." Silence. Emma stared at him. He smiled small and real, the first in years. "Why were you watching the restaurant tonight?" he asked her. "My mom's in the hospital." "St. Grace." "She hasn't eaten either," Emma said plainly. "I just wanted to see the food. That's all." David's heart thudded against his ribs. "Where's your dad?" She looked away. "Gone." She didn't elaborate. David felt a storm building in his chest. Rage, grief, guilt. He had lived his whole life behind glass boardrooms, bulletproof cars, high-rise apartments, and this little girl had just broken through every wall he thought was impenetrable. "Would you take me to see her?" he asked. "Your mom." Emma nodded slowly. "But I need to ask her first." He smiled again, this time softer. "That's fair." As they left the cafe together, David held the door open for her, not just physically but metaphorically, for something far greater than either of them understood. What started as a whisper from a waitress had begun unraveling everything David thought he knew about himself. But this was only the beginning. Forgive us for pausing the story here. What would you have done if you were David that night? If this touched you even a little, we'd love if you hit that like button and share this moment with someone who still believes in kindness. Your support keeps stories like this alive. They walked side by side in silence through the biting Boston wind. The city lights shimmered off wet pavement, but David Whitmore hardly noticed them. All he could see was the small figure beside him. Emma, her hands tucked into her sleeves, chin buried in her coat collar. She didn't complain once about the cold. She had asked for nothing. She owed him nothing. Yet somehow, David felt like he was the one being led. When they reached St. Grace Memorial Hospital, the automatic doors opened with a sigh. The smell of antiseptic hit him like a memory he couldn't place, clean, sharp, sterile. A place where hope and grief coexisted, like two strangers sharing an elevator. Emma didn't hesitate. She navigated the halls like someone who had been there far too many nights. Past the pediatric wing, down a long corridor painted with fading butterflies, and then to oncology. At the end of the hallway was a glass room. Inside, a woman barely 30 lay on a hospital bed, thinner than anyone her age should be, her head wrapped in a floral scarf. Her eyes, though half-lidded and tired, were unmistakable. They were Emma's eyes. When she saw her daughter, the woman Rachel Carter smiled faintly, warmth blooming through her gaunt features. But when she saw David step through the door behind her, that warmth vanished. Her voice, though raspy, held steel. "Who are you?" David raised his hands gently. "My name is David Whitmore. I met Emma tonight. She didn't ask me for anything. I insisted on helping." Rachel narrowed her eyes. She didn't look impressed by the name. "I'm not some charity case, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "And my daughter's not a pet project." The words stung, but David understood. This woman had spent months fighting for her life and for her child's. He didn't blame her for seeing danger in even a well-dressed stranger. "I don't see her as a project," he said quietly. "I see her as someone remarkable." Rachel's gaze softened, just a fraction, but she remained guarded. Emma sat beside her mother, holding her hand, gently resting her head on her shoulder. That sight, tender and temporary, burned itself into David's soul. After a pause, Rachel spoke again. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything," David said. Then after a breath, "I want to help." Rachel coughed a deep, painful sound and looked toward the ceiling. Her voice, when it returned, was low. "You're the first person in a long time to say that without expecting something back." For a long time, no one said anything. The only sound was the beep of monitors, the whisper of tubes, the quiet thrum of the machines that kept Rachel breathing, and then a voice broke it. Not Rachel's, not Emma's. A voice from the door. "Excuse me, is this girl with you?" A security guard stood in the doorway, a clipboard in hand. His expression was professional, but not unkind. "There's a missing child report filed on her." David's stomach dropped. Rachel closed her eyes slowly. Emma's voice trembled. "I didn't run away. I just wanted to be near Mom." The guard looked apologetic, but firm. "She's been flagged as a runaway from a foster shelter. We're obligated to report." Rachel looked stricken. David saw it, the panic, the helplessness, the rising tide of maternal fear. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "She's not a runaway anymore. She's with me." The guard hesitated. "And you are?" David reached for his wallet, flipping it open. The name carried weight in Boston. The guard blinked. The posture changed. "I'll need a statement," the man said, softening. David nodded. "Of course." After the guard left, Rachel looked at David, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman fighting him. She looked like a mother on the edge of trust. Why, she asked. David shrugged, but his voice cracked when he answered. "Because I didn't know how much I was missing until I saw her." Later that night, when Emma had fallen asleep in a chair next to the bed, Rachel gestured for David to follow her out into the hallway. She moved slowly, painfully. Every step cost her something. They stood by the window watching the lights of Boston blink in the night. "She doesn't deserve the life she's had," Rachel whispered. "I tried to keep her in the system, thinking she'd be safer, but she kept running back here. To me." David turned to her. "Because she loves you. That says everything." Rachel smiled sadly. "She's stronger than I ever was." Then she reached into her bedside drawer and handed David a small tattered notebook. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed at the edges. "My journal," she said. "Emma doesn't know about it, but when something happens to me, I want her to have it. But only if you stay." David held the notebook like it was made of glass. Rachel met his eyes. "I've spoken to a lawyer. If you're serious, I'd like you to adopt her, but only under one condition. Anything he said, she must never forget who I was, who I am." David swallowed hard. "I promise." That night back in the city, David sat in his penthouse alone. The silence was deafening. The lights were too bright. The wine tasted like metal. He looked out over the skyline of Boston and realized something that made his throat tighten. He didn't want to live like this anymore. Not if it meant letting her disappear. Forgive us for pausing the story here, but if you were in Rachel's shoes, would you trust a stranger with your child? Let us know in the comments below. And if this chapter touched your heart, we'd be so grateful if you gave us a like and shared it with someone who still believes in second chances. There are some nights when everything changes, not through thunder or fire or fanfare, but through a quiet decision made from the soul. And for David Whitmore, that decision came not with a signature on a contract, but with a whispered promise beside a hospital bed. 3 weeks after Rachel Carter placed her journal in his hands and asked him to become her daughter's father, David walked into St. Grace Memorial Hospital not as a visitor, but as a man with purpose. Papers were signed. Conversations with lawyers were completed. And in the presence of a notary, Rachel smiled through tears and gave her blessing. 2 days later, she was gone. Emma didn't cry, not in the way one might expect. She sat in silence for hours beside the now empty bed, her small fingers clutching her mother's scarf. David sat with her, saying nothing, letting the grief breathe. Because sometimes love means knowing when not to speak. That night, Emma turned to him and whispered, "Now I'm yours." David blinked back the sting in his eyes and replied, "And I'm yours." What followed wasn't a fairy tale. It was real life, slow and steady, but rich with meaning. David sold his cold penthouse overlooking the Charles River and bought a quiet house with a sun-drenched backyard in a suburb just outside Boston. Emma chose her room, the one with the window facing the garden, and painted it lavender. The first thing she hung on the wall was a photo of her mom. David didn't try to erase Rachel. He honored her daily. He read the journal late at night, learning her fears, her dreams, her hopes for Emma's future. And he made sure Emma knew all of it, who her mother was, what she believed in, and why her courage mattered. At school, Emma blossomed. She wasn't the shy girl with secondhand shoes anymore. She was still gentle, still observant, but now she was safe and loved and rooted. When other kids asked about her family, she would simply say, "I have a dad who chose me, and a mom who watches over me." David learned to braid her hair badly at first, to pack lunches with notes to help with science projects, to listen when she didn't want to talk. He missed meetings for her recitals. He burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. And every single bedtime, without fail, she asked him, "Are you happy?" Every time his answer was a little more certain. "Yes, happier than I ever thought I could be." 1 year after Rachel's passing on Emma's 10th birthday, David threw a backyard party, not extravagant, not glamorous, but real. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees. There was laughter, music, and the warm smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. Among the guests was Lauren Mitchell, the waitress who had changed everything with 4 quiet words. "That girl is hungry." She brought Emma a necklace with a tiny golden spoon on it and whispered, "So you'll always remember how powerful even a little hunger can be." Emma hugged her tightly and said, "You're part of our family now." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Emma sat beside David on the porch, her knees pulled to her chest. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I don't think Mom's sad anymore. I think she sent you to find me, and me to remind you that love isn't just for other people." David nodded, his voice thick. "She changed both of us." Emma smiled, the moonlight soft in her eyes. "When I grow up, I want to open a restaurant, but not a fancy one like Whitestone. I want a place where kids can eat even if they have nothing." David looked at her full of pride. "It'll be the most beautiful restaurant in Boston, and I'll be your first customer." A beat passed. Then Emma said, "No. You'll be co-owner. We do this together." From that moment, it became their mission. 2 years later, in a quiet corner of the city, a new sign hung above the door of a cozy cafe with sunflowers in the windows and a chalkboard menu that read, "Emma's Table, Food with Heart." No child ever paid there. Every meal came with a side of dignity, and tucked behind the register, framed in glass, were 4 words written in David's careful handwriting: "That girl is hungry." It reminded every customer, and David himself, how one small act of compassion had rewritten not just his life, but Emma's. One day as they were closing, a little girl came in shivering alone, her coat too thin. Emma looked at her and saw herself from years ago. Without hesitation, she brought her hot cocoa, wrapped her in a blanket, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." David watched from the counter, heart full, knowing the cycle had come full circle. Sometimes family isn't born, it's built, choice by choice, day by day, and sometimes it starts not with love, but with kindness. Forgive us for ending the story here, but tell us, if someone had whispered those 4 words to you, how would you have responded? And if you could change one stranger's life today, what would you do? Now we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Comment number 3 if it touched you deeply. Number 1 if it didn't quite land for you, or number 2 if you felt somewhere in the middle. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. And if it meant something to you, please tap the heart and share it with someone who still believes in the power of love that chooses.